In 1784, a sealed manuscript arrived at the Ingolstadt Lodge with no return address and no sender name. The courier was a woman in a hooded cloak who spoke no German, handed the package to the librarian, and disappeared into the narrow streets of the Bavarian town. The librarian noted the event in the lodge records, 6 words in precise Gothic script. Manuscript delivered by unknown initiate, female, unreadable accent. That entry is still in the state archives today. What the manuscript contained, the official inventory describes as a genealogical record of the founding houses. But every historian who has seen the original disagrees on what founding means. Some say it refers to the lodge itself. Others interpret the word as describing the founding of the governing system that still operates in 13 nations. The official story, the one you find in university textbooks and Wikipedia edits, states that the Bavarian Illuminati were disbanded by the Edict of 1785. The Elector Karl Theodor ordered all secret societies dissolved, the Ingolstadt Lodge was raided, and the documents were burned in the town square. There are eyewitness accounts of that burning, letters from local clergy describing the smoke rising over the rooftops, the smell of leather and paper, the shouting of the crowd, but the lodge minutes from 2 months earlier tell a different story. They record a secret transfer of 7 codices to an undisclosed location, carried out under cover of darkness by 3 senior initiates, whose names were redacted even from the internal records. The manuscript you are reading now was one of those 7. The burning was theater. The document survived. The woman who delivered the codex had one identifiable feature that the librarian recorded with unusual precision. She wore a ring, silver, with a single symbol engraved on the bezel. The symbol was a compass, rose with 47 points, each point terminating in a tiny star. The librarian drew the symbol in the margin of his entry, and that drawing is still visible in the original ledger. The same symbol appears in other contexts throughout the codex itself, stamped into the margins at irregular intervals, always marking a paragraph that contains a date, a family name, or a geographic coordinate. It is a navigational key, a marker system that tells the initiated reader which sections contain operational information versus theological or historical context. 47 points. 47 families. The number is not coincidental. If you have ever watched a news broadcast and felt that the connections between events were being deliberately obscured, you understand the frustration of knowing something is wrong without being able to prove it. The Codex acknowledges this feeling explicitly. The introduction, written in an ornate but legible hand, addresses itself not to the lodge members but to the one who reads this alone, in a room without windows, having found this text by means that required courage. The author anticipated a reader like you, someone who would find this document outside official channels, in a language they had to teach themselves at personal risk. The first paragraph of the introduction contains a single word underlined 3 times: persist. The codex is divided into 3 sections, each sealed with a different color wax. The first section, sealed in black, contains the theological framework, the justification for why a secret government is necessary, written in the language of Enlightenment philosophy blended with Gnostic Christian mysticism. The second section, sealed in white, contains the organizational structure, the hierarchy of degrees, councils, and geographic divisions that govern the global system. The third section, sealed in red, contains the genealogies. That red seal has been broken only twice in recorded history, once during the original lodge reading in 1785, and once in 1946 by a British intelligence officer who subsequently wrote a classified report that remains partially sealed under the Official Secrets Act. The genealogical section lists 5 bloodlines, each traced back to a specific European noble family that survived the political convulsions of the 18th century. The first bloodline originates with the Frankfurt banking houses, the families that financed the wars, controlled the minting of currency, and established the first international credit networks. The Codex names the family patriarch specifically, along with the location of the family vault in the Frankfurt Cathedral crypt, a vault that architectural records confirm exists but has never been publicly opened. The second bloodline traces to the Habsburg court in Vienna, specifically to a council of 7 families that operated outside the official imperial structure, coordinating policy across the Austro-Hungarian territories without ever appearing in government documents. That vault in the Frankfurt Cathedral crypt has never been opened. Architectural records confirm its existence, yet the city has never allowed an excavation. If you want to follow the evidence trail as it unfolds, subscribe to this channel. Every week, another sealed location, another bloodline, another page of the Codex, and in the comments, drop the word vault if you believe that crypt will one day be unsealed. The third bloodline originates in London, in the financial district that rebuilt itself after the Great Fire of 1666. The Codex claims that the London bloodline functions as the communications hub for the entire system, the families that own the news distribution networks, the private postal systems, and the early telegraph infrastructure that became the backbone of global information control. The fourth bloodline is traced to Paris, specifically to a single street near the Palais Royal where three houses shared a connecting garden. The families that lived on that street in 1782 remain in those houses today, according to property records that show continuous ownership by the same surnames for over 240 years. The fifth bloodline is the most mysterious. The Codex does not name the founding family. Instead, it provides a set of behavioral identifiers, patterns of philanthropy, educational institution endowments, and marriage alliances that reveal the family's presence without explicitly stating its identity. The identifier list includes the endowment of exactly 47 university chairs across Europe and North America, the sponsorship of specific archaeological expeditions to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and the funding of translation projects for forbidden texts held in Vatican and Ottoman archives. If you know where to look, the Codex says, the fifth bloodline reveals itself through the works it funds, never through the names it signs. Now here's the detail the researchers tried to bury. The genealogical section does not stop in the 18th century. It includes a continuous update record, written in different hands and different inks, that extends unbroken from 1785 to 1945. Each update adds marriages, births, and deaths, a living document maintained by someone in each generation. The most recent entry, dated 1943, records the birth of a child in Zurich to parents whose names match the first bloodline's Frankfurt family tree. That child would be approximately 82 years old today. The Codex was actively maintained until at least the middle of the 20th century. It was not a historical artifact. It was an operational manual. If you have ever filed a FOIA request and received back pages so heavily redacted that the text was unreadable, you understand the architecture of denial that protects systems like this one. The Codex describes exactly this mechanism. It states that public transparency is a controlled substance, released in measured doses to create the illusion of openness, while the core structure remains invisible. The document explicitly warns future initiates that any attempt to expose the bloodlines through conventional channels will be met with a cascade of denials, file destructions, and contradictory statements designed to exhaust the investigator. The Codex does not advise fighting this system. It advises outlasting it. The Council's own minutes from July the 1782 record the inventory of the 7 codices, but one entry in that inventory was redacted even in the classified copy that survived the 1946 British Review. The redaction covers a single line, the description of what the 7th Codex contains. The 6 other codices are described in precise terms: architectural plans, religious rites, financial ledgers, genealogical records, prophecy interpretations, and initiation procedures. The 7th entry consists of 8 words, every one obscured by a careful inkwash applied by a steady hand. The only thing legible about the 7th entry is the date of its last update, November 1785, 2 months after the official date of the Ingolstadt burning. The British intelligence officer who examined the Codex in 1946 was a man named Commander Alistair Finch, attached to the Allied Intelligence Division responsible for assessing captured German documents. Finch's report on the Codex runs 17 pages, of which 9 remain classified to this day. The 8 pages that were released contain Finch's summary of the Codex's first 2 sections, the theological framework and the organizational structure, but the genealogical section is entirely absent from the declassified portion. Finch's conclusion, paraphrased in a footnote, states that the document appears to describe a continuing organizational structure with which British intelligence has had indirect contact and recommends no further investigation at this time. The recommendation was approved at a level that required the signature of the Joint Intelligence Committee chairman. The specific vault location mentioned in the Codex was redacted from the FOIA release that a researcher obtained in 1998. The redaction covers a compass bearing, a street address in a European capital, and a description of the vault's entrance mechanism. What was released reveals only that the vault exists on a property that has been in continuous private ownership since 1763, that the property tax records show no change in ownership since that date, and that the property is located within a 5-minute walk of a major central bank building in that capital city. Whether the vault has been moved since the Codex was written remains unconfirmed, but the 1943 birth entry in the genealogical section suggests the system is still active and still maintains physical infrastructure, at locations known only to the initiated, a single property, unbroken since 1763, within walking distance of a central bank, and a birth entry from 1943 proving the system breathes. If you want to follow where this vault leads, subscribe. There are more documents that name what the redacted coordinates conceal, and in the comments tell me, does the year 1763 mean anything to you, or does the location itself trigger something you have come across in your own research? If you have ever wondered why global instability follows patterns that seem coordinated but have no visible coordinating body, the Codex provides an answer that no news network will read on air. The document describes a mechanism called the lever system, a set of economic pressure points that can be activated in sequence to produce specific political outcomes without any overt conspiratorial signal. The lever system includes control over the issuance of sovereign debt, the timing of food commodity price fluctuations, and the strategic release of migration waves through border policy changes. The Codex states that the lever system was designed in the 18th century but has been refined continuously, and that its operators are never the same people who appear in public office. The operators, according to the Codex, are trained from adolescence in a curriculum that combines economics, history, and psychological conditioning at institutions funded by the bloodline families. Here's where the document makes its most uncomfortable claim. The Codex states that the 5 bloodlines have been consciously breeding for cognitive traits across multiple generations. The genealogical records include annotations about the intellectual capabilities of each child born into the system, rankings on a scale of 1 to 47, with notations about which children should be directed toward which careers within the hierarchy. The annotation style is clinical, detached, and consistent across centuries. A child ranked in the top 5 in the 1788 generation was directed toward diplomatic service. A child ranked in the middle range in the 1843 generation was directed toward financial administration. The Codex treats human potential as a resource to be allocated, not a gift to be nurtured. The second section of the Codex, sealed in white wax, contains the organizational blueprint that governs the global system. It describes a hierarchy of 13 regional councils, each responsible for a geographic territory that does not correspond to any modern national border. The councils are numbered 1 through 13, but the numbering follows a pattern based on the date each council was established, not its geographic location. Council number 1, established in 1781, oversees the European heartland. Council number 7, established in 1824, oversees the North American corridor. The Codex specifies that council members never know the identities of members from other councils. The system is compartmentalized at every level, with communication flowing only through designated liaison officers who are themselves unknown to the broader membership. This compartmentalization creates a paradox that the Codex addresses directly. How can a centralized system operate effectively when its components cannot communicate with each other? The answer, written in the white section with unusual clarity, describes a symbol system, a set of architectural, artistic, and behavioral markers that allow initiated individuals to recognize each other across councils without ever speaking a word. A specific type of window arch in a government building, a particular knot pattern in a public garden, a hand gesture used during a toast at diplomatic dinners. These markers are described in the Codex with the precision of a field manual, complete with diagrams and historical precedents. The markers have changed over time, the Codex notes, but the function remains constant. Silent identification without evidence. The white section also describes the financial structure that sustains the entire edifice. The Codex names 14 specific trust funds established between 1787 and 1812 that were designed to generate perpetual income independent of any national currency or government. The trusts were capitalized with gold, land, and shares in the earliest joint stock corporations, and they are administered by law firms that have maintained the same client relationships for over 200 years. The Codex does not name the law firms directly. That information was reserved for the 7th Codex, the one whose inventory entry was redacted, but it provides enough detail for an initiated reader to identify them through property records and succession filings. The trusts were structured to be legally invisible, owned by shell entities that own other shell entities, with the ultimate beneficiaries listed in a single document kept in the vault whose location was redacted from the FOIA release. Perhaps the most chilling passage in the organizational section describes the system's method for handling members who attempt to leave. The Codex states that resignation is not permitted at any level above degree 12, and that any attempt to withdraw from the hierarchy will be met with a graduated response. The first stage is financial. The departing member's business interests will face regulatory scrutiny from multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. The second stage is social. The member's reputation will be degraded through coordinated leaks to media outlets owned by the bloodline families. The third stage, reserved for members who attempt to disclose operational secrets, is described in a single sentence. The initiate who speaks the names will find that their own name has been removed from every record of their existence. The Codex does not elaborate, but the genealogical section contains annotations next to 3 names from the 1850s, each marked with a symbol that appears nowhere else in the manuscript, a circle with a diagonal line through it, the alchemical symbol for dissolution. The 1946 British report by Commander Finch included a marginal note that was itself classified for 40 years before being released in a heavily redacted form. The note reads, "This protocol appears to match the treatment of Defector X44, whose case file is sealed at deed notice level. Defector X44 has never been identified publicly, but the date of that defection, early 1944, coincides with the disappearance of a mid-level German intelligence officer who attempted to defect to the Allies with documents he claimed proved the existence of a pre-war financial network linking Berlin, London, and New York. The officer was transferred between 3 interrogation facilities in rapid succession and then vanished from all records. His name does not appear in any prisoner of war list, any intelligence debriefing log, or any post-war immigration document. He was removed from existence, exactly as the Codex describes. If you have ever read a declassified file and realized that the redactions were thicker than the text, you understand the shape of the wall that protects this system. The Codex devotes an entire chapter to the philosophy of redaction, arguing that the most effective censorship is not the removal of information but the creation of doubt about whether the information ever existed in the first place. The chapter advises that when a document must be released, the redactions should be maximal rather than minimal, enough ink to make the reader wonder whether the underlying text was genuine or planted by the releasing agency itself. This psychological technique, the Codex claims, is more effective than destroying documents because it leaves the investigator uncertain whether the investigation is real or directed. The technique has been refined over 2 centuries, and its modern manifestation is visible in every heavily redacted FOIA release you have ever seen. The third section, sealed in red wax and broken only twice, contains the genealogical records that form the operational core of the entire manuscript. The section begins with a preamble that is addressed not to the council members, but to the genealogist, who will maintain the records after the current keeper dies. The preamble states that the genealogist must be a blood relative of at least one of the 5 families, must be trained for 7 years before assuming the role, and must never reveal their identity to any member of the council system, including the highest degrees. The genealogist operates in total anonymity, receiving updates by courier from each family branch and recording them in the Codex by hand. The preamble warns that if the genealogist is ever identified, the entire system of bloodline tracking collapses, and with it the mechanism for selecting candidates for the highest degrees. The genealogical entries themselves are written in a code that combines standard German script with a separate symbol system used only for names and dates. The symbol system appears to be based on a numerical grid, each letter of the alphabet mapped to a 2-digit number, with the numbers then arranged in a pattern that requires knowledge of a specific page from the first section to decode. Researchers who have examined the Codex have been able to decode approximately 60% of the genealogical entries, but the remaining 40% use a variant of the symbol system that has not yet been cracked. The uncracked entries correspond to the most recent generations, suggesting that the encoding became more sophisticated over time as the risk of interception increased. You have just seen that 40% of the genealogical entries remain uncracked, the most recent generations hidden behind an encoding that grows more sophisticated as the risk of exposure rises. That is the open thread we will pull next, because those uncracked names belong to the living. Subscribe so you are here when the key breaks. And in the comments, drop the date range you think the uncracked entries cover, 1700, 1800, or later, because that narrows down which bloodline members are still walking among us. The decoded portions reveal a pattern that contradicts the official narrative of meritocratic advancement in modern institutions. The genealogical records show that individuals from the 5 bloodlines are systematically placed into positions of influence across government, finance, academia, and media generation after generation. The placements are not random or based solely on individual achievement. They are coordinated through a council that reviews the progress of each bloodline member at ages 25, 35, and 45, deciding at each milestone whether the individual should be promoted within the hierarchy or redirected to a supporting role. The annotations next to each name record the outcome of these reviews in a terse notation: promoted to council liaison, Redirected to academic track. Removed from active service, retained on financial support. The system treats careers as strategic assets to be deployed for maximum institutional penetration. One decoded entry from the 1890s describes a bloodline member who was placed in a junior editorial position at a London newspaper. The annotation notes that within 12 years, this individual had risen to senior editor and was responsible for shaping the newspaper's coverage of the Boer War in a direction favorable to the Bloodlines' financial interest in South African mining operations. The newspaper's owner at the time was not a Bloodline member, but the Codex notes with cold precision that the owner's daughter had married into the London Bloodline 5 years before the editor's placement. The marriage created a channel of influence that did not require the owner's knowledge or consent. The system does not need to control every person in power. It only needs to control the chain of influence that connects them. Another entry dated 1907 describes the placement of a bloodline member into the newly created United States Federal Reserve System during its formative years. The individual was not a governor or a board member. The annotation specifies that the role was deliberately kept at the technical level, where the individual could influence the design of the monetary system without attracting public attention. The entry notes that the individual participated in the drafting of the Federal Reserve Act's language regarding the issuance of currency, specifically the provisions that allowed private banks to hold the majority of the system's gold reserves. The Codex describes this as the insertion of a permanent lever. That lever is still in place today, operating through mechanisms that the general public does not understand and that most members of Congress do not fully grasp. The Codex also records the placement of bloodline members into the emerging intelligence agencies of the early 20th century. One entry from 1916 describes the transfer of a bloodline member from a diplomatic post in Vienna to a newly created intelligence bureau in London, where the individual helped establish the protocols for signals intelligence gathering that later became the foundation of the Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ. The annotation notes that the individual's role was to ensure that the intelligence agencies focused on external threats while leaving the internal financial system unexamined. The Codex describes this as the principle of directed observation, the idea that intelligence agencies should be calibrated to see certain threats and remain blind to others, particularly threats that originate within the financial networks that fund the agencies themselves. The architectural blueprints from the Austrian Engineering Museum, dated 1873, show underground structures that match the Codex's description of a vault complex beneath a specific street in Vienna. The blueprints were part of a municipal infrastructure project that was ostensibly for a water distribution system, but the tunnels branch off in directions that lead not to water mains, but to private properties owned by the Vienna bloodline families. The blueprints include a notation in the margin, handwritten in the same Gothic script as the Ingolstadt librarian's entry, that reads, "Access to the archive is through the third gate, which is disguised as a drainage maintenance entrance. The key is held by the caretaker of the church across the street." The church in question still stands, and its caretaker is still appointed by a foundation whose board members have included the same surname since 1881.